Hello, my name is Ray Mackenzie Wilson and I grow chrysanthemums. This is the first in a series of videos demonstrating the growing of chrysanthemums. It's primarily intended for the beginner grower and for the novice. I'm sure that more experienced growers will get better results than I do, but this is the way I grow and this is what I'm going to demonstrate. Before I get into the details of the series of videos, I need to talk a little bit about the growing cycle of chrysanthemums. I'll start with winter storage, and I'll discuss that in more detail later. And then we get into the taking of cuttings. Now, cuttings are usually taken in the March into early April time frame, depending upon the need for cuttings. After the cuttings are well rooted, which takes about 3 weeks, you transfer them to 4-inch pots, and at that point I put my plants outside. I expose them to the weather. Prior to that time it's clearly done in the greenhouse. After about another 3 weeks to a month, they're transferred to 10-inch pots, and that is usually occurring in the mid-May time frame. When the plants are about 12 inches high, you've got at least 4 to 6 leaves below the growing tip. You pinch the tip to give you the required number of stems. I'm only going to talk about growing display or disbuds mums. I'm not going to talk about garden varieties at all. I will demonstrate my method of supporting the stems. The plants grow quite tall, and in the July time frame you usually pinch the stem to limit the height. Some of the varieties will grow 6 or 7 feet tall, and that's a little bit too tall to handle. So what you do is to pinch the stem in the mid-July time frame to limit the height. Throughout the process you disbud at the leaf axils, and I'll demonstrate that. And throughout that time I feed with, generally feed with a 20-20-20 fertilizer. Chrysanthemums are quite hungry, heavy feeders, so you need to feed them heavily. Some people feed with fish meal and things of that nature, but I do not. In the mid-August time frame I'll switch from the 20-20-20 to a bloom booster, so as to encourage the set of the buds. At this time the daylight length is decreasing, and as the plants are phototropic, they would have begun to set their buds. You continue to disbud throughout this period, and then the buds form, and you have to select the appropriate bud at the top of the stem, and I'll demonstrate that in one of the videos. Then in the beginning of October you begin to see colour in the buds, and at that point I select the ones I'm going to be putting into the show and move them into my greenhouse. The objective is to simply shelter the buds from any direct impact of the rain and any discoloration or damage from the rain. Throughout this time you begin to prepare for the show, and I will demonstrate cutting the blooms and transferring the blooms to the show, and then I'll show you how to do the winter storage process. So let's get on with the next video in this series, which is demonstrating winter storage. . I happen to store my mother stock for the winter in the greenhouse. It's now the beginning of April, and this shows my mother stock as they come through the winter. In the November time frame, you cut the stems back to about 4 inches above the soil, and you put them into a sheltered location. Any sheltered location would do. They shouldn't be allowed to get wet and to freeze, so you need to put them somewhere. Didn't need necessarily, you could put them in a garage or something of that nature, or a carport would be ideal. They can be allowed to freeze, but they shouldn't be wet when they freeze. This damages the root structure and kills the plant. But if you put it in a sheltered location, you need to give the plants a little drop of water about every 2 to 3 weeks to a month throughout November, December, January. And as in February, you begin to see more growth coming. Shoots will begin to appear, and you need to give them a little more water as the amount of greenery increases on the plants. Now you can see there one plant that's died off, and that's due to the fact, almost certainly, that it was wet when it froze, and they have to be replaced. I usually have to replace, I grow 50 pots, and I usually have to replace 1 or 2 plants each year. Now at the end of February, I will give the plants, as well as water, I will give them a good shot of fertilizer, 20-20-20 again. This encourages the shoot growth so that you get some good shoots for taking cuttings. These plants have been well picked over. I've taken now some 250, 300 cuttings. We have to invariably supply new cuttings to our schools program people in North Carolina, so there's always a need for additional cuttings, and we also sell plants at our annual plant sale. I'm now going to talk about taking cuttings. Now, before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about growing medium, about what I grow the cuttings in. I've tried the Oasis wedges, I've tried the Favard seed starter, I've tried 3B, Favard 3B as a growing medium to start cuttings, and they all seem to work equally well. I think the most important aspect of taking cuttings is not so much what you grow them in, but how you treat them once you've taken the cuttings. I have to mist frequently. I have what I call a propagating bench, which I'll show in a few moments. I use trays. I use the Oasis trays without the wedge, but putting a growing medium in. This particular one that I've got here is happens to be full of 3B. I'm using 3B this year as the growing medium. Now, the first thing you should do when you're taking cuttings is to transfer the name of the cutting. I'm going to take cuttings from this pot, and the most important aspect of the game is to transfer the name of the cutting from the pot that you're taking the cutting from into your starting tray. Now, this happens to be Winston that I'm taking cuttings from, and what I do is I take a cutting, I put my hand over the top of the plant and select a point just below a leaf node and snap it off. I then strip off the bottom leaves, and I use a rooting hormone and put it into the tray at least an inch deep. These particular trays are about 1.5 inches to 1 3/4 inches deep, and I always put them in that deep. I'll fill up that row of plants with additional cuttings. I take them off just below a leaf node and place in the growing medium, in the rooting medium, and enter them into the tray. Take a number of these, and that row is now full of winsome cuttings. This is a general view of my propagating bench. As I said, it consists of a wooden box about 4 inches deep with an electrically heated cable in the bottom. It keeps the bottoms of the plants at about 65 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. There's frames at the side which support 2 pieces of glass, and I cover the thing with a thin plastic film on 3 of the sides. On the south side, the side farthest from us, I put a sheet of newspaper but leave it otherwise open. This allows ventilation, but the plastic keeps the interior fairly humid, and I get a very high success rate. Typically I'll get 100%, certainly no less than 95% of a tray. Propagating bench in operation. As I say, I drape it with plastic simply to keep the humidity high, but it has to be vented. And the south side, I drape a piece of newspaper over it just to shelter from the plants from the direct sunlight. And I usually get about 100% success with this sort of an operation. The final issue that I want to talk about on propagating is commercial cuttings. Cuttings that you buy from commercial growers. As I mentioned earlier when we were talking about winter storage, I always lose 1 or 2 plants and I have to replace those. I buy my cuttings from King's. They are the premier grower in the United States, and I feel that they provide the very best material. When they arrive, they usually come on a Thursday afternoon. They're shipped on a Monday from Portland, and they arrive on a Thursday afternoon at my house. And I immediately try and get them transferred to 4-inch pots. They come in a plastic container, and they have, in this case, it's all the same cultivar, Suzanne, and they're not labelled on the plant themselves, but they come in a paper tube, and I recommend not removing the paper tube. It would probably damage or disturb the roots, so what I do is to plant them well into the growing medium and cover the root structure so that the paper tube does not dry out. The most important thing, as with taking cuttings, is to transfer the name to the pot, the cultivar name. As I said before, a cultivar, a plant without a name is not worth anything. In fact, it's an embarrassment. And so I plant these in the pots and transfer the name, and then I put them in usually in a bowl for several days to make sure that they're well irrigated. And I mist them again, as with my cuttings. I mist them frequently for the first 2 or 3 days, just to make sure that the leaves do not dry out and get damaged, because the leaves are all important to the growth pattern at this stage. So there we are, we have 5 well-rooted cuttings covered up around the paper tube so that they will sustain themselves. And now I'll transfer those to a bowl of water. But again, as I said, I missed them. When you get the plant, in this video today we've covered winter storage, we've covered how to take cuttings and to propagate them, and how to treat commercial cuttings. In a future video I will discuss transferring to 4-inch pots and then into 10-inch pots.